The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webcast. We're going to give it a minute or two, let people join on, but we thought we would just give a quick shout out to those people that dialed in early. Thank you very much indeed. So we'll begin our presentation shortly, so stand by. Okay, everyone, thank you very much indeed. We wanted to give it a minute or two to have people jump on the call, and I can see more people are starting, but to thank the people who came in early, thank you very much indeed. We look forward to giving you an update. So with that, let me go ahead and begin our presentation. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our webcast on why applying the simple formula for success resolves data management chaos. I'd like to start with a few introductions today. It's our pleasure to introduce Marcy Barkin-Goodwin. Marcy is the founder and CEO of Access Software Designs. And since 1989, Access Software Designs has provided education and consulting services to Fortune 1000 companies and government entities. In addition, Marcy is also an expert in the field of enterprise model management infrastructure and is also the co-creator of EM-SOS. Marcy's company, Access, is a value partner of Sandhill, and together we offer EM-SOS, our data modeling center of excellence framework, to our clients. Welcome, Marcy.
Thank you, Robert.
Also speaking today is Jeff Giles. Jeff is Sandhill's enterprise architect and data governance expert who has been addressing the issue of convergence of data modeling and data governance during the past several years. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Robert.
And of course, you're listening to Robert Lutton, Vice President of Sandhill Consultants. Ungoverned critical data. In today's world, ungoverned critical data costs businesses significant amount of time and effort, adversely affecting the bottom line. Providing information that is fit for use to knowledge workers is a critical business capability, which enables accurate analytics and makes better business decisions possible. In today's presentation, we'll be speaking on how organizations can apply a simple formula for formalizing data governance practices in data modeling solutions, bringing quality to data initiatives like master data management, machine learning, data integration, and other critical data-centric objectives. In fact, when we initially started developing this webcast, we were thinking about doing this for machine learning and artificial intelligence advanced analytics, so that machine learning and artificial intelligence could achieve better metadata quality. But we realized that these technologies have to go back to the fundamentals. We have to teach these technologies, machine learning and artificial intelligence, with simple formulas that can deliver improved consistency and reuse, thus producing higher metadata quality so that organizations can better leverage these tools for improved business outcomes. So with that, what we're actually going to do is we're going to kick off this presentation. We'd like to solicit some feedback from our audience and do a quick poll. So Marcy and Jeff, you will just bear with me a minute. Let me try and see if I can show a poll. So let me go ahead and launch this poll. So, Jeff and Marcy, can you see a poll launched at the moment? Are you seeing a poll?
I can.
Great. And the poll should be saying, are your data modeling efforts project-oriented or part of an enterprise data governance strategy? So I'm collecting responses. We'll give it a minute there. Thank you indeed for selecting your responses. Please input your responses now before we close the poll, and then we will show that. Okay. Looks like the poll settled down, so let me close this and let me see if I can share this. So Jeff and Marcia, are you seeing the shared poll?
Yes, I do.
Yes, we are.
And I believe it matches to our expectations. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, let me go ahead and hide that and move on to our next slide. And just make sure that, Jeff, can you see our next slide? Just help me out there. Great.
I can.
So, and this continues to baffle me, because according to Gartner, 85% of most organizations' metadata is captured and developed through the data modeling process. And we go, yay for data modeling. Yet, why is it that there's a significant amount of time and effort expended on managing critical data which directly affects the bottom line? And this is one of the questions we'll be answering on the call today. And so with that, I'd like to start the ball rolling with Jeff to discuss why it is that data modeling is seen mainly as a project deliverable, as our poll just showed there. So Jeff, over to you.
Thank you, Robert. Well, if we look at data modeling in a historical context, data modeling came about for modeling data storage. And that was generally associated with doing some sort of a project, that is, delivering a database. But nowadays, metadata is much more valuable than just, I've built a data model for a database. It's now looking at things through a business perspective. What is the logical or conceptualization of some of this metadata? So when you're doing modeling, the byproduct of the design and modeling process is the creation of metadata. And the thing about metadata is it's critical to understanding what data you have and what does it mean. So quality data output usually depends heavily on managing your metadata. So let's take a look at some of the issues that result from not governing your metadata. Next slide, Robert. So when we look at ungoverned metadata, that is, I'm building a data model for a particular project and I don't have any particular standards in place or anything like that, what you're going to get is inconsistent, incorrect, and redundant data. So if we look at metadata, it's really just a guide to all the data within your organization. So here are some basic quotes from Gartner. The first one being, complexity is increasing, not decreasing, and we're capturing more data, not less. So this notion that you need to manage how you are collecting the metadata requires some kind of governance to be in place. And they say by 2020, which is now, there's going to be a lot of policies just based on metadata. Because if we think about it, the security regulations, GDPR, and all the other ones that are coming about are really based on the classification of metadata, like a gender or a social security number and things like that. So it's important for us to, of course, identify this stuff, but also what exactly does it mean? You know, what does it mean for something to be considered critical versus not critical, right? So when we do data modeling, we are actually creating new metadata and updating or modifying existing metadata. So if we're going to do governance, it needs to start at the point of where you create the metadata. So next slide, Robert. So that starts to look at the data modeling tools. Now, there's really two parts to this. There's the governance part and there's the modeling part. So governance is the enterprise level oversight processes, and modeling is the actual activity that's being governed. So if we think about this, the governance is basically telling us what we need to do from an enterprise perspective. And data modeling is how we get the work done at the local level. So we're looking at the integration of data governance acting upon the data modeling process, which requires us to think about both enterprise level as well as local metadata management. So creating a data modeling center of excellence is a good way of moving data modeling from that project deliverable focus to more of a program focused activity. So let's take a look at the next slide, Robert. Like any good program, you need to have a set of principles or a vision of what you expect it to be. So establishing a base set of principles helps guide the data modeling practice, because that's really what we're talking about here, is a practice of data modeling. These principles are based on the idea that repeatable processes with standards will, over time, improve the quality of data. So we can look at it, and obviously the first one is the enterprise perspective. So even though I might be working on a data model for a small project, I want to be able to look and see if that concept of, let's say, a customer is a much broader idea, because we can think about things of a build to customer, a ship to customer, an end user customer. So there can be many different kinds of customers. So we really have to look at it from an enterprise perspective. Also, the consistent data model life cycle, right? So we have the opportunity to design new things from the top to the bottom, that is conceptual, logical, physical, but we can also start from the bottom to the top, that is reverse engineering from physical, and then integrating that into the much broader logical and conceptual ideas. The idea here is that we want to have a consistent process and how we transition from each one of those stages. Obviously, standardized metadata is very, very important here, because what you name something is really important from the perspective of the business. Now, oftentimes when you're designing data models for databases, they'll use some sort of shorthand or abbreviations. If you're going to do that, you need to standardize how you're going to abbreviate something. So if the concept is a customer, am I going to abbreviate that as CUS, CUST, CSTMR? Whatever you choose needs to be standardized. Repeatable processes and workflows. What we want to do is we want to do the same operations the same way every time. When we do that, it ensures that we're following a consistent quality control process. So when the output of that process is metadata, we can be reasonably assured that it's of good quality. Now, once you go through all these repeatable processes and workflows and design a data object, you want to be able to reuse it. So if in one project I go through an entire process and I define exactly what a product is or who a customer is, I can reuse that same data object in multiple different projects that are oriented around that same subject matter. Reduction of unwanted data redundancy. I'm sure you've seen this many times where people have taken a data model, copied something from one data model and plopped it into another one. They have no idea whether the thing they just copied is any good or not. They just use it as a basis to start something. So what this ends up doing is propagating more and more inconsistencies and problems. So we want to make sure that we don't do that. So following these basic principles, we're able to start up a data modeling center of excellence that's based on some components. So Robert, next slide, please. So these are the basic building blocks for the data modeling center of excellence. So let's go through them one at a time. The first one is the establishment of roles. So this is basically who does what work, right? So in the context of roles, you have people who are responsible for things. You have people who are accountable for things. You have people that are informed and consulted. We need to know who is playing what role, and within that role, what are they supposed to do? And hopefully that's not one person doing all the roles, but it might be. Architecture, we're really talking about the processes that influence how we build that data architecture. We want to make sure it's consistent. We have processes for going from one layer to the next layer to the next layer. We want to make sure that the standards are enforced as we drive through these layers. And of course, support is the technology component, right? A managed metadata environment requires some technology to assist you. Obviously, the data modeling tool, but it doesn't stop with data modeling tools. You may have metadata repositories, business glossaries, data catalogs, knowledge management systems. All of these things come together to help you build this data modeling center of excellence. Next slide, and we'll take a look at the other parts. Communication. Now, when we talk about communication, there's two parts to this. There's communication to the greater enterprise about the work that we're doing. So if we're going to go through creating quality metadata, we want to let people know that there's a place where they can see the quality metadata. That is, a data dictionary could be published. We could also be supplying information to a data catalog. We could be supplying information to a business glossary. All of those things need to be communicated outside the Data Modeling Center of Excellence so that we can show that we are adding some value. The other part is, of course, internally focused, which is what are the standards that we use when we build a data model? What are the policies? What are the procedures? How do we do the quality control checks? All of those are part of this communications plan. Now, quality, that's the application of the procedures and the standards. When we take procedures and we integrate them with standards and we have quality checks in place, we can ensure that we're meeting some expectations. So it's not enough to say, yes, we have standards. Yes, we have processes. You need to know that we're following the processes and we're adhering to the standards. If nobody checks it, we have no way of knowing. So that's the quality part. Governance, of course, is the overarching umbrella on top of everything, because the governance is central to the mission of the Data Modeling Center of Excellence. So we think about this, your data modeling efforts could be part of a small local governance objective, or it could be part of a much broader enterprise-wide governance concept. All depends on whether you're looking at localized or more broad concepts, but governance is central to everything. So when we take all these components and we get them together and have them interacting, we can look at the Data Modeling Center of Excellence. So let's go to the next slide, Robert. So here's a pictorial representation of all the components working together. So this is what gets us the assurance that the metadata that we're producing for various modeling projects can be reused for other projects because it's undergone a process that produces trustworthy output here, right? So when we're talking about a program versus a project here, you may be doing lots of projects, but you might be getting material for those projects from the data modeling program, right? So let's summarize this in the next slide, Robert. So I've mentioned this a few times in the presentation, but here it is in sort of a flow process. Starting with governance, right? What is governance doing? It defines the guides, the modeling requirements, the life cycle concepts, okay? Now this governance integrates with much larger governance ideas, and those larger governance ideas may also be influenced by what the business wants to do, what the business objectives are. So you can see that we're really looking at the business objectives and how they actually come down to the strategy and then down to the requirements for how we're going to do data modeling. So the data modeling concept has to have some processes that are consistent, repeatable steps that we do every time to accomplish some modeling process. So this has two effects. One is obviously it's consistent and repeatable, but also reduces training time. Because if you have a new person who's coming into your data modeling center of excellence, they need to be trained on how to do things. Well, if training is sit down with Jeff this week and he'll tell you about how he thinks you should do something, that's probably not the approach we want if we want consistent and repeatable. We want to be able to publish those processes and orient the new modeler to how to accomplish that particular task. Okay. Standards are, of course, the rules, right? So if we're going to do the work, we have to do the work as it applies to certain standards. And that standards are, how do we name something? What's the standard for a naming standard for metadata? Some of you might be familiar with the 11179-5 ISO standard, which has to do with naming metadata. So that would be like a standard that we would use for naming things. But also definitions. This is one of the things that a lot of people don't do. They'll create new metadata, but they won't define what it is. So when somebody goes to look at it, they'll say, effective date. Does this include the date that it starts on, or is this the date after you mentioned that it's the effective date? So the definition of what something is really, really important to understanding the data you're collecting. And then obviously when you have the processes acting on the standards, you get the quality metadata output, which ensures some trustworthiness. You can communicate this to the enterprise. They can use it with some assurance. But once you've done this, of course, it's not static. You have to monitor it over time. Things do change, and you have to make sure that you're continuing to update the metadata and make sure it's the most current. So let's go to the next slide, Robert. So I'm kind of curious here to find out how many of you have thought about this and have an integrated governance concept into your data modeling work. So Robert, could you run the next poll?
I can do. Jeff, can you tell me, are you seeing?
I can see it. Yes, I can.
Great. We'll give our audience just a minute to solicit their input. And again, we thank you. We're just trying to get some feedback. Give another second or two. It seems that it's pretty much settled down. So let me close off this poll now and share the results.
Oh, well, that's surprising. That's surprising that there's a lot of you that actually are integrating some data governance into your data model lifecycle, which is excellent. So what I'd like to do right now is to talk to you a little bit about this idea that you can start with a framework here. So we put some thought into the approach for construction of a data modeling center of excellence, and it starts with a framework. So what I'd like to do now is to introduce Marcy to talk to some of the details about our thought process around constructing a data modeling center of excellence. So Marcy?
Okay, well, thank you, Jeff. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So EM-SOS is our framework. What I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about why we developed EM-SOS. We work with a lot of customers, and typically we are brought in to help folks develop their standards. They may already have some, but they need some more, or they need an evaluation of the quality of the ones that they have, or whatever. So they ask us to come in and take a look. We do that, but what we realized time and time again was that there really wasn't a strategy that drove the development of the metadata or the models. Some folks had a few processes, most of them didn't. If they did have them, they weren't documented, but there was no overarching plan as to how best to leverage the metadata that was being created. And obviously that's what we cared about. The metadata was being created in a vacuum, if you will, project by project, without any intention or goal really of reusing the structures or integrating the availability of those structures with other modelers' work or departments. So many times it was simply a one and done type of approach to building models. So because we saw this, because we saw this as a widespread problem, we did some research and we came to understand a few things. The main thing was that developing a model and a metadata management infrastructure was critical. And a lot of our clients understood that. But the task, even if they acknowledged it, was really challenging for a number of reasons. It obviously can be time consuming. The resources might not be available. I mean, everyone's already working at least one full-time job. They may not have expertise in the standards and the processes domain that is required for this sort of overarching framework. And although there might be some documentation about standards and procedures, it might be scattered across different systems, different departments, and be in incompatible formats. We have some Excel spreadsheets over here, Word documents over here, some stuff is online, whatever. And also some of that content between different groups or whatever may be siloed, may be incompatible with each other. So this was something that became, how shall I say, kind of near and dear to our hearts because it was such an obvious, consistent problem. So we decided to build a framework. And our goal with building this framework, EM-SOS, was to make the implementation of a practical modeling framework as quick and efficient as possible, whether the environment is limited to a single department or spread across multiple physical locations. So EM-SOS is meant to be and is an enormous jumpstart in creating a model management framework. So it provides extensive, well-written content, it has standards, it has procedures, as well as workflows and model templates and so forth. We're going to show you a few screenshots of some of these things just so you get an idea. Because the framework already exists in its entirety here, it ensures the quality and consistency of the metadata because we understand this domain and we understand what it takes to be able to have trust in your metadata, what that requires. And so we put all of that into a framework that's easy to use and that you can just put in. Also, EM-SOS lives on your company's intranet, so it's easy for everybody to get to. It's one place where everybody can go to get whatever information that they need. It also incorporates a lot of Irwin functionality. We know this tool well, and there is quite a bit of functionality in the tool that can help you in standardizing the metadata. Some folks aren't as knowledgeable about the functionality in Irwin, and so we've brought that to bear in some of these processes to make it easier for folks. Okay, Robert, I think next slide, please. So these are the basic sections of what is in the framework itself. It creates a managed modeling environment. We've got data model life cycles, standards, procedures, reusable data structures, the way in which those can be created and monitored and so forth. I'm going to talk a tiny bit about each one of these. This data model life cycle is really critical. Really what it is is the strategy of how you are going to use your metadata in its real workable form. How that model is created, how it flows through the different layers. There may be multiple life cycles, as Jeff mentioned before. You might be an organization that's dedicated to build logical models first and then go to physical. Some other projects or whatever may start from reverse engineered models and may or may not go to logical, whatever. So there could be different pathways in this data model life cycle. It's not one size fits all. But nonetheless, this is the strategy. And this is the starting point for all of the standards and procedures that are written and put into the framework. So what we've done is create a lot of different diagrams which show you graphically what the flow of these different cycles are. I've done a lot of teaching in my time, and it's pretty obvious to me that folks learn in different ways. Clearly, all of the procedures and the life cycle and so forth is written out in text form, but just like a data model, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and some people can very easily grasp, okay, this is what I need to do when they look at a picture, instead of just reading a lot of text. So we not only have the text for this life cycle, but we also have diagrams. The life cycles can accommodate iterative development, waterfall methods, whatever it is that you're using. The standards and procedures sections, they contain everything necessary to build consistent master metadata. So we have different naming standards, definitions, property requirements, and all that sort of thing. So that's in there as well. And let me talk just a moment about these reusable data structures. These are really the heart of the matter. This is what we found was really missing in terms of metadata development, pretty much across the board. And when you can build approved reusable data structures, and that means not just the entity definition and name is correct, but it means that all of the attributes, whether you use them or not in your particular model, but all of those attributes also have been approved through a process. So you know that when you reuse an object that's in the library or the shared object model or whatever, that you can be assured of the fact that you are already meeting standard. This saves a huge amount of time, makes the approval process much easier, and creates a flow that goes very quickly through the life cycle. We also have measures and metrics. I'm going to let Jeff talk about that later. Robert, let's go to the next slide. So I've already mentioned how these reusable data structures are really key. We would go into places and we would see that customer or client or whatever was being recreated in separate models without knowledge of the fact that, gee, it might exist someplace else. So if we have a pattern of development where we're creating these structures, storing them someplace where everybody can get to them, then the amount of conflicting definitions or similarly named but not the same entities or tables or whatever is greatly reduced. Basically, they provide confidence in the quality of the metadata. So we had a client, I'm going to give you a little example here. We had a client that really exemplified the problem in bullet number 2 here. They were a healthcare company, and they had a provider database which had so many redundant entries for the same doctors that they could no longer distinguish really which instance was correct or current. The metadata was completely out of alignment, and yet they had entities for doctor, group doctor, provider, etc., none of which had been cross-referenced or looked at or whatever. So what was happening was every time this doctor would change a group or move someplace else, they were creating a new instance for this doctor. So clearly, we not only had multiple entries for the same individual, but we were getting a massive amount of multiple primary keys. So the problem was proliferated throughout the entire provider database, and it was pretty much, they had reached the end game. They really couldn't even use the database anymore. Well, we knew that they would benefit from a strategy of reuse and the supporting processes that would result in these reusable objects, and that they were critical in achieving all the benefits of a governed metadata program. And we said, well, we have this solution. Next slide, please. Okay, I am just going to go through just a very few screenshots. We just wanted to give you an idea of what this looks like. Here's the EM-SOS. The product has evolved over time as we've worked with our clients, obviously. And so these screenshots are from our latest version, which is 2.0. So just a general overview. This is a Windows-based structure, of course. And on the left, you'll see a list, which is really the table of contents. And the right side, as you see, displays each item in detail when it's selected from the list on the left. We have major sections. The DMLC is at the top. We have a standard section. We have processes, templates, and so forth. Really, EM-SOS, what we wanted to do was give you a baseline of very robust content so that you did not have to write this stuff. It's easily customized and so forth, but I want you to just see on the left that this list continues and there's a tremendous amount of material here. All of it was meant to be for your review. We know that all of these standards, all of these processes really are required for a successful governance program with metadata. But the important thing for us was to prevent you from having to build it all from scratch. So we just want you to be able to look at it, edit it, delete it, whatever, and save you a lot of time in the process. Next slide, Robert. So let's take a quick look at an example, one example from each section. Here's the top level of the Lifecycle overview. And again, these are diagrams that were built to help folks understand what are we really trying to do here. These diagrams exist for each of the processes that are listed in the process section. So you have different ways of looking at it and understanding it. The DMLC is really the modeling governance strategy come to life. In this section, we have a life cycle that was written around the goal of object reuse and standardized repeatable processes. That was our real goal here. You'll see just at the very top, I just want to point out that we have enterprise data modeling standards and procedures. That's pretty much where it all starts, to say we have these standards, we have these procedures, that's what's going to guide the development. And right under that, we have something called Global Shared Data Object Library. When you first start, there won't be anything in this library or in this model, but we have processes that allow you from the very first project to start to build those reusable objects. So next slide, Robert. I would like to say that as you can see, but this is sort of as you can see. There are several diagrams below the top level diagram that show the details of the flow of each process listed in the process section. So we just wanted to put a few of these up here to give you an idea that this is really pretty robust. The diagrams make it easier for the modeler to know exactly what steps are necessary. And as Jeff mentioned before, these are especially useful when new resources are brought in, because those folks can virtually train themselves on the requirements of the modeling efforts. So everything that they need to know is right here in this one place. We don't have to take a senior resource off their work to say, please train Joe for the next couple of days on how we do all of this stuff. We can send them right over. They can look at all of this and then just have whatever individual questions they may have. Also, having a detailed and documented life cycle also serves another purpose. We had a pharmaceutical client that had about 200 modelers. These modelers were spread across 5 global locations: Asia, America, Europe, so forth. They could not share models due to the fact that each site was acting as their own business. We've seen this a lot. But the problem here was that it was a huge hindrance to the research and development department goals of the company. So we worked with them and built or tweaked some of the processes of the life cycle that would permit all of the locations to have access to a global shared object library, so that those structures could be evaluated, they could be shared, they could be reused, and everybody could start to get on the same page, which was extraordinarily necessary in the R&D efforts of this pharmaceutical company. Next slide, please, Robert. So standards, we all know what they are. We all have some. Most companies have, of course, standards for entities, attributes, tables, columns, whatever. But there are quite a few other standards that are necessary to aid in the management of models. An example would be something such as color usage. We've gone into companies where, you know, everybody just picks a color, but those colors, if you're going to use them, need to have their own legend or understanding. You know, red is there's a problem, green is it's been approved, whatever it might be. This is not something that's usually thought about in terms of the need of a standard, but there's a lot of confusion around these types of graphical elements of a diagram. When you get people to review models or analysts who are looking at them, this can be very confusing. So you need a standard for colors. Possibly you don't have a standard for the naming and definition of subject areas if you're going to use those. So these are the types of things that are usually forlornly left out of the standard list, and yet they're really very important. Also, if you're using a repository tool, of course, there's going to be a few more standards. For instance, library names, that type of thing. So metadata really can't be governed unless you have documented and easily accessible standards. And the danger of ungoverned data, as all of us know, is that it doesn't live in a vacuum. It persists and it increases over time throughout the organization. And that's the real problem. It just gets worse and worse. Next slide, please, Robert. Okay, here's the standards section. Just wanted to show you what we're looking at. If you look on the left, you'll see that we're in the standards section that's been opened up. We're in object naming for the logical data objects. Of course, there's the physical as well. We're just looking at attributes for the moment, just an example, because I want to show you what the template looks like. We wanted to be consistent, of course, in making it easy for folks to use EM-SOS. So the templates that we have built for standards and procedures are all the same. That way the modeler can always go to whatever section they know it's there and it's all consistent. We have a little definition of the object at the top. It's called the description section. Then we have the standard itself. Sandhill does a lot of education as well. So part of what we wanted to do was bring in that education element as well. So that's why we have a description of what either the object or the process is. The object says what it is. The process description will tell you why we have this process and why it's necessary. Our theory and our important goal here in developing this framework, we just really wanted to make it as easy as possible for all of our clients to have every standard and every process that they needed to ensure that they were getting metadata governance at the modeling level. So what you see are all of the elements of what a standard should incorporate. In other words, all these different bullets and so forth on the right. But I do want to make something clear. We are not selling a methodology here, not at all. Whatever standards you already have are incorporated then into the framework. For instance, right here, the attribute, it says that it's going to be named in initial case. Well, if in your organization, your attributes are all upper, we just change this to upper. So what we've done is lay out all of the properties that need to be documented for this standard. And then you can change it as will. It's not a methodology. Next slide, please, Robert. Okay, so processes. I call them the other half of standards. You know, processes are often neglected, or possibly they're grandfathered in from previous older versions of the modeling tool, or folks who have already been there before and this is the way they did it. They may or may not still be good, depending on what's happening. And in most cases, certainly they are not complete. There might be just a couple of processes or whatever. But they're really important. They're just as important as standards to acquire the governance that we're looking for. They do need to be efficient within the capabilities of whatever tool you're using. We believe that they should be as simple as possible to achieve the desired outcomes. I am an ex-modeler. Please do not ask me to do anything more than I have to do. It's a very time-consuming task, and I'm happy to follow standards and procedures as long as they help me out. I'd like to do the best for the company, but please don't overburden me with extraneous forms or whatever else. So we were very aware of that when we built this. They should be documented in a consistent format so that the modeler doesn't have to worry about reading different formats, written by different people, written in a different voice, that sort of thing. And I would really like to be able to get to them easily. Most important, they should support the data governance goals of the organization. Next slide, please, Robert. So, what do we mean by best practices processes? I've pretty much described that already. They, of course, enable the enforcement of governance policies. What I've discovered is that if a process is easily written and well understood, the problem of enforcing the repeatable process or the standards becomes pretty much a non-issue. They need to be established for the life cycle, of course. I need to know who is responsible for that process, and if I need a change to the process, who do I go to, who owns it. They provide an audit trail, and they're evolutionary. So we want processes to be not a hindrance to the actual work that has to be done. We want to get to the shortest way between 2 points. We want to go from ungoverned to governed data. or metadata, I should say, is really what we're after. Well-written processes provide all the benefits that you see on this slide. So processes evolve over time. We find better ways. The modeling tool changes or gives us more functionality. So it needs to be, your framework needs to be a living, breathing thing. It changes over time, it gets better, and incrementally, it helps your modelers in your specific environment more and more. It accommodates the potential changes and the growth of your modeling environment. Next slide, please. Here's a process. As you can see, all the processes listed on the left. We happen to be looking at the logical model submission and deliverables. This process, its purpose is to verify that the model meets standards and to list whatever deliverables might be expected for that delivery. Here we're looking at a purpose section of this template. Again, who is responsible, what role or which person is responsible for maintaining the process, for making changes, whatever. We see our old friend, the description section describes the process, what it does, why it's important. Again, this is part of our focus on education so that folks know why we're asking them to do these things. We are not policemen. This is for the greater good. And when people understand that, really enforcement is not an issue. There are other sections in the template below this. There's an audit section that lets you document why and when anything has changed. We also have a tips section down there that you can't see. Tips about either the process itself or the associated tool functionality, something that we want you to know. I want to mention one little thing about the audit section, which is we got a huge compliment. We have a Wall Street client who told us that they'd never been able to quickly pass an audit for their models. And having this audit section in EM-SOS was extremely valuable for them and solved that problem. I think while we're here, one last little thing. You may notice there's a blue hyperlink at the bottom of what we see on the screen here. EM-SOS has hyperlinks throughout, either to bring you to a form that's necessary or to another process that you need to look at or whatever. So it's really cross-referenced, everything in here. Next slide, Robert. So the only thing I want to show you here is that you can see we're looking at a process here for model creation and population. So what is the population part? The population is, do we already have a reusable object that I can populate my new model with so that I do not have to create something from scratch? We have overlaid, as you can see, a picture of the associated diagram. We've just put that on top of the text for the process so you could see how these are related. You'll see in the center it says global shared objects. So in model creation and population, we're asking you to look first before you do anything to see whether or not there are entities here that you require that have already been approved. By doing this, this is the very beginning of the checks and balances that we have to say we do not want to create redundant data. Please use whatever's already here that's already been approved. So this piece of the process really prevents much of the unwanted redundancy, and it greatly decreases the creation of conflicting or inconsistent metadata. In essence, we've kind of done all the hard work of making sure that each process fulfills its place in the overall data governance strategy, and that's the foundation of EM-SOS. We want you to be able to implement a management framework with a minimum amount of effort. Next slide, Robert. We want to make communication easier. Here's a workflow. This is for logical model submission. I'm just going to point out that the workflow documents the status of the model through its process, and it also enables efficient communication for everybody that needs to see it, because it's a centralized place in which you can share related documents. You can have discussions about what's going on with it or if there's a problem, and it enables everybody to easily see any part of the model's progress without the need to send individual emails back and forth. All of that communication can happen here. Next slide, Robert. So any data modeling center of excellence must communicate content. It must be accessible at an enterprise level, and depending on the plan of your choice, it may contain some or all of these communication vehicles. The key here is that without really good communication, you cannot build governance into your modeling efforts. Jeff, I'm going to pass this over to you to talk about the slide on monitoring and measurements, so everyone can hear a voice that's different from mine, and so can I.
Okay.
So,
well, thank you, Marcy, for going into the finer details about the Data Modeling Center of Excellence using the EM-SOS framework. So essentially, the Data Modeling Center of Excellence is a program level thing that manages metadata for lots of projects. Now, if you saw before in my flow example, at the end, there was this concept of monitoring, right? So essentially monitoring is just making sure that the work that we said that we were going to do, we're actually doing. So there's some concepts for this, like reports and checklists and workflows that Marcy's kind of talked about, reusable templates that'll enforce some things like naming standards. Those are all ways that we can leverage data modeling and technology to help us do that. So Robert, if you go to the next slide, please. You've often heard it mentioned many, many times that you can't manage what you don't measure, right? So when we start talking about this concept of reusability, what we're really talking about is the shortening the time it takes to build a data model. And by having reusable objects, it makes you more agile because you have a library of predefined things that you can assemble quickly and build out the model that you want. So oftentimes when I talk to customers about this process and implementing an EM-SOS in the context of a data modeling center of excellence, they say, well, I'm trying to talk to my management about this and they want to know what's the return on investment. So this is where we really talk about this concept of return on reuse. When you first start this process, you'll be basically creating a lot of stuff from scratch because it's got to go through all the processes to have it verified and validated as a quality object. But each time you go through the cycle, more and more things become reused, and the more and more reuse you have, the less chance you have for error, and it also allows you to finish your work quicker. So what I'm going to do now is just turn it back over to Robert for some closing thoughts. Robert?
Jeff, thanks, and Marcy, thanks very much indeed. When we started this presentation on how applying a simple formula for success resolves data management chaos, if you're looking to create a data modeling center of excellence for your data modeling environment, you can either build all of this manually, or you can jumpstart your data modeling center of excellence with EM-SOS. I should note that, full disclosure, Sandhill is an organization that sells several of the main data modeling solutions today. However, I'm always shocked when some of our smaller clients say that they're not continuing to renew their data modeling licenses. Yet data modeling, along with a data modeling center of excellence, is a foundation for creating quality metadata. And no, spreadsheets or Visio are not viable options, and nor is starting from scratch, really. You've heard Marcy and Jeff speak about generic clients and the problems we have solved for them Here are just a few more of our EM-SOS clients that have used our framework to implement and customize our data modeling center of excellence to their needs, and that has helped them apply our formula for success to resolve their data management chaos. And of note, these clients have a variety of data modeling tools. So as we come to the end of this presentation, we wanted to let you know that it is possible to successfully govern your data. In fact, the future of data quality depends upon it. It starts with data governance needing to be integrated into your data modeling environment. From there, you need to have the processes documented and approved and certified fit for use. We actually recently talked about this in an article posted on TDAN, which talks about building a data modeling center of excellence. If you're unsure where to start, contact us, Sandhill, for a data modeling governance workshop, for a model management assessment. And we hope that you've seen that to successfully develop a data modeling center of excellence, to govern your data, you need an all-inclusive framework. So with this, if your end destination is to successfully govern your data, then we should open up a dialogue. You can contact me, Robert Lutton, at Sandhill Consultants, in the email address shown on the screen, and we will follow up with each of the participants to answer any remaining questions in the coming days. Thank you for your time.